Hello, my name is Gunivortus. My family and friends call me Guus. I am a Dutch who lives in Germany. It means English is not my mother tongue. So I hope you will understand me and please ignore my accent and the few mistakes I certainly will make in the pronunciation of some words. In this first talk, I want to tell you a little bit about Frau Holle. I was invited to this probably because I did a lot of research about Frau Holle and published about it. As I am used to, I wrote down the text of the talk and will read most of it from my tablet in front of me. The many aspects of the figure of Frau Holle were a very long time and still are so captivating that they never let go of me, even after several decades, and the enthusiasm and my emotional bond are still as lively as in the early years. And that is why my research on everything possible about Frau Holle never stopped. And that led in 2019 to the next edition of my book, Goddess Holle. This edition contains so many changes and additions that it actually has become a new book. And this book, which is available in German and English, is the basis for this short talk. Many people all over the world know the figure of Frau Holle, and we owe that mostly to the fairy tale book of the Brothers Grimm, which gained great fame and popularity in various editions and languages. It is much less known that there existed several versions of the Frau Holle fairy tale in Grimm's time and before. The two brothers took the version that a local woman told them. And there are dozens of folk tales about Frau Holle. Before continuing talking about my Frau Holle research, I will first tell you one of these folk tales. At the Schellenberg, a hill between the German villages of Heimbuchenthal and Wintersbach, there stood a castle, and in its courtyard was a mighty linden tree. That tree was as old as the castle, and it was said that as long as it stood there and was green, the castle would stand too. But when it withered, so would the castle fall into ruins, and its inhabitants would also perish. The lord of the castle had two sons. The younger boy had broken his leg when he was a child, and had limped since then, and was therefore called Crooked Jacob. As the father came to die, he devised the castle to the elder son, as the firstborn, and his heir, and also a large chest filled with money. Keep Jacob with you throughout your life, the father admonished, and be good to him, as one should be to a brother. And that was exactly what the older brother promised. But after he had taken over the castle after his father's death, he immediately began to treat his brother badly. He was no longer allowed to eat with him at the same table, and could never live in the castle, but had to sleep in the stable with the horses, and eat from the dog's bowl. For some time Jacob endured that, but then he demanded his inheritance and wanted to try his luck abroad. But his brother, the Lord, not only gave him nothing, but he even beat him and had him thrown out the castle. Saddened, Jacob went upon his way through the dense forest, uphill and downhill, and in the evening he came into the valley where now stands the Carthusian monastery. He sat down under a tree, put his head in his hands, and wept bitterly. As he wanted to get up again, an old woman was sitting on a stone in front of him, spinning yarn and continuously nodding her head while she paddled the wheel. That was Frau Holle. And she asked why he was so sad. And he replied, "Oh, you cannot help me," and stood up to go on his way. "You are the crook Jacob from the castle," she said, "and I can and will help you if you trust me." Then Jacob's heart was pounding, and he told Frau Holle of his suffering. Then the old woman spoke. "Come with me, Jacob, and in 3 years we shall go back to your brother. Maybe he will have changed his mind by then and hand you over your property." So she took him to her little house, where he had to water her rosemary, feed her cat, and cultivate her flax field. In the winter he had to cut pile pegs for the wine growers and ship poles for the mine river skippers. And in spring he carried them up to the mine valley to offer them there on the market for sale. Then Frau Holle picked up her distaff and, using it like a cane, packed her yarn in the pannier to sell, heavied her pannier on her back, and went with him. When Jacob became his load too heavy because of his stiff leg, the old one took over that from him and laid the wood on top of the pannier as if it were straw. Yeah, Jacob had a good time with Frau Holle. She also taught him the farm work, so that after some time he could do that work better than a born farmer. But after 3 years, the old woman said, "Now we shall go to your brother." And she picked up her distaff, and she and Jacob set off on their way. When they came to the castle, the brother was sitting in the yard under the linden tree, for it was very humid, and the linden tree blossomed and gave a wide and cool shade, and the birds were singing in its branches. The lord of the castle inquired about her desire, and Frau Holle began to speak for crook Jacob, telling the lord that his brother was there and wanted what belonged to him. The lord of the castle replied that if they did not leave immediately, he would tear off her old shaky head and cut the other leg of the crook. Then the old woman became angry, seized her distaff, and thrust it into the linden tree. And when that happened, the birds flew up and away, and the tree began to tremble from root to top, and from the trunk and branches the tree sap flowed and dripped to the ground, and the leaves turned to yellow and fell off. Then Frau Holle said, "Oh, you villain! You shall endure like the linden tree, and you shall wither and languish and die a miserable death." Thereupon she went away with Jacob. It all happened the way Frau Holle had said and proclaimed. When the linden tree had died, the castle did not last any longer. With every violent storm, a wall or a tower fell down, and the rain washed away the stones so that it could not longer be built up again. No one wanted to stay in the castle anymore, and the lord of the castle was left alone and lived in the cellar, because there was the money box, and he did not want to part with it, but kept and guarded it day and night. When then at last there was nothing left of the proud castle, except the cellar basement and the withered linden tree which stood in front of it, a great storm came on a November night and overthrew the rotten linden. It fell down just outside the cellar door and blocked the exit. The lord of the castle could not open the door any more, no matter how hard and how often he ran against it. And on his money box he had to suffer his death for hunger. Of course, Frau Holle knew all this well, and one day after his death she came to the ruins, lifted simply the linden tree, opened the box, and divided the money in two equal parts. One she left lying there, the other part she took with her. And when she was out of the cellar, it collapsed too. At home she gave the money to Jacob and said, "Now each of you has their own, he and you, as your father had decided. Take now what is yours, but put it out of your mind to become a nobleman, and become a peasant instead. Good luck, farewell, you will not see me any more." Then Jacob bid her farewell, and from the money he built a large farm in the Hunsrück region, in the village of Altenburg. He married, and on his farm many servants and maids worked, and he became a successful farmer. No plague came into his stable, no vermin on his fruit trees, and no hailstorm over his fields. When the servants had their hands full during the harvest season, it often happened that in the early morning the field work was already done, that the sheaves were all cut and bound and piled up, so that they only needed to be loaded and driven home. The people were wide-eyed, but Jacob knew who had done it all. When his first son was born, and he had told that to his neighbors, he thought in his joy that he also had to tell it to Frau Holle, and so he set off for her. But he sought her in vain, and found neither the cottage nor the valley where it stood. And after wandering in the forest all day, in the evening he suddenly found himself back very near to his farm. He never saw the good Frau Holle again, and he died at the blessed age of 90 years. His farm still exists today and is called the Hunsrück farmstead. In addition to fairy tales and folk tales, Frau Holle has also established herself in other fields in the minds of people, and I hope in the hearts too. There are several regions in Germany where you can hike in the footsteps of Frau Holle. The most famous place is certainly at and around the High Meisner mountain in northern Hesse in Germany, where Frau Holle appears in several places. But there are also beautiful Holle hiking trails in other German federal states, which certainly also the fairy tale-like nature can be admired, such as the Frau Holle Dream Loop near the town of Reinsfeld in Rhineland-Palatine, near to the border with Luxembourg. This fairy tale hike leads through a very varied landscape of the Black Forest, the high forest part of it, and the Frau Harke Trail of Legends near the town of Kamern on the western edge of the West Haveland Nature Park, northeast of the city of Berlin, is one of the Frau Holle walks. And then there are also the Frau Holle plants. In legends and customs, several plants are associated with her. In fact, too much to tell about all of them here. The best known is probably the black elder, which is in German also called Hollerbusch. Linguistically, the name is related to the Germanic word Hollana, which means holy, propitiating, and gracious. That fits well to Frau Holle. In legends and customs, the elder has an important function as a guardian and protective tree for hearth and home. And this bush has a lot to offer to promote health too. A well-known herbal book calls the elderberry a true medicine cabinet. Other Holle plants are, for example, the field maple, which German secondary name is Maasholder, and also the juniper. In some areas in Germany, it was customary to take off your hat or bend your knee when passing a juniper bush. Juniper has long been considered a fertility carrier. Well, other plants such as the apple tree, the heartleaf, the linden tree, the holly, the mandrake, and the little woodruff have all a connection to Frau Holle. For almost 200 years, enthusiastic researchers have been collecting customs and folk knowledge about Frau Holle and her parallel figures from many areas of Germany and the surrounding countries. A lot has been accumulated since then. A well-known piece of tradition around Frau Holle is the rest of work at the end of the year. In many legends it can be read that then work in and around the house must be done or rest, otherwise Frau Holle intervenes punishingly. A lot of customs are regionally bound. For example, at the town of Coburg, it was recommended to eat lentils on New Year's Eve, because then the coming year you should not run out of money. In Lower Saxony, every New Year's Eve between 9 and 10 o'clock, Frau Holle drove with a cart full of New Year's gifts through all the towns and cities whose residents used to worship her. If she smacks the whip, which only her admirers could hear, they came out to receive their gifts. Directly before the handing out of presents at Christmas, Frau Holle appeared in the German municipality Salz, which is near the town of Bad Neustadt, taking over this task from the Christchild. Nobody knew where she came from. She was simply there and went through the quiet village streets, knocked on the doors of the houses in which children at the decorated and sparkling Christmas trees were eagerly waiting for the gifts, and wherever she came she got admission. Then Frau Holle wanted to know whether they had always been good-natured and hard-working in the past year, and woe if the report was not in their favor. There could have been given then some rough blows with the broom rod. And in the region of Franconia, the well-behaved children were given nuts, apples, and goodies. In the German towns of Würzburg and Wertheim, even the Christmas tree and Christmas presents were brought by Frau Holle. Here and also in many other places, Frau Holle and Christian customs were mixed, which may be one of the reasons why Frau Holle was able to maintain even in such things. Besides the name Frau Holle, she is also known as the Holla, Hullafra, Berchta, or Berchta, Herta, Frau Harke, and many other names. From the year 1875, it is reported that deep in winter, in January, at the German town of Bischofsheim, a Holle feast was celebrated, where her admirers walked around wearing animal masks and other horrifying disguises to depict the wild hunt. In the extended Alp region, such as the German state of Bavaria, Austria, and parts of German-speaking Switzerland, down to the north of Italy in South Tyrol, the custom of Percht processions takes place every year. An Austrian website reports on this custom. The word Percht comes from the female figure, the so-called Frau Percht. It is said that in ancient times, on the rough nights, she came down from the mountains into the valleys and ensured law and order there. She exercised social control, kept strict order, and punished evildoers. Due to the demonization of Percht and her entourage, these processions mainly show masked and disguised figures that look very ugly. The Perchten spirits are divided into two types. There are the good, friendly, helpful, or beautiful Schönperchten, and the ugly, bad, and harmful Schiachperchten. In today's processions, almost the latter occur. Oh well, there's so much more to tell about Holle and Perchta customs and folk knowledge. Much too much to include it all in this short talk. But much of that can be read in my book, Goddess Holle. Many well-known poets and much more unknown ones have also dedicated themselves to Frau Holle. To get a taste of that, here's one of these poems which the Pomeranian schoolteacher, poet and writer Hugo Keker wrote around 1900. It is titled in German Kornmuhme and translated as Corn Spirit. Nun wogt im Wind das junge Korn, voll blüht die Hollerdoll. Bekränzt mit Mohn und Rittersporn, geht durch die Welt Frau Holle. Sie lässt sich schauen am lichten Tag, so lang die Ähren reifen. Durch Roggenfeld und Weizenschlag sieht man sie heimlich streifen. So geht sie nach altem Brauch und segnet still die Saaten. Und Kornduft zieht mit herbem Hauch bis zu des Dorfes Katen. Doch wenn durchs Feld die Sense blitzt, im lichten Ährengolde, hoch auf dem Erntewagen sitzt Kornmuhme dann, Frau Holle. And with that, I leave the house of poetry again and turn to the research on Frau Holle. Since quite a few centuries, many researchers have followed the footsteps of Frau Holle. If all of these researches were discussed here, we would still sitting around here until next week. Therefore, I limit myself to just a very few aspects. Medieval sources repeatedly make it unmistakably clear that pre-Christian beliefs were very strongly opposed by the representatives of the Church. It is, therefore, only understandable that adherents of pagan beliefs or customs in a Christianized environment were very careful when speaking about their pagan gods. The scriptures may have been used instead of their names. And that is why Frau Holle was also an alias. The Hulda means the gracious one. In addition, it also could be an honorary name. But in any case, it did not clearly indicate the goddess to outsiders. And this alias remained in use, while the actual name was lost. Almost only the clerics of the time could write, and precisely they strongly avoided writing down indigenous names. And so the alias rose up to the main name. The question of what the real name of this goddess was cannot be answered with a fair amount of certainty. But there are a number of indications that suggest that her old name was perhaps Nerthus, the goddess that has been handed down to us from the 1st century. To name just a few of those indications, from a legal text from the time of Charlemagne, it can be followed that two peoples who in the 1st century were called Nerthus worshippers moved to Thuringia, precisely into the region that we have learned from many folk tales as the stronghold of Frau Holle worship. Some other indications are the intervention in human action, visits to people, concern for peace, traveling around with a retinue. Yes, these are also indications of a Nerthus Holle connection, and they are not all clues. Since Nerthus was called an earth goddess in the 1st century, this also may apply to Frau Holle. And then there is the name of another goddess associated with Holle. In medieval Latin documents, indigenous names of deities were Latinized, as were common in the Middle Ages for many centuries, and namely in the way that a Roman name was used for an indigenous deity. And that is why this native goddess was called Diana in writings. So this is not about equating with the Roman goddess Diana, but clearly pointing to an indigenous goddess. Johannes Herold, for example, a Dominican prior in Nuremberg, names in the 15th century both names for the same goddess when he writes, "The goddess Diana, who is called Frau Hulda by the common people, who, with her entourage, moves around." Other sources from the Middle Ages and later indicate similar. Now, we know Diana as a very powerful goddess. And based on the evidence I collected from the many sources, it can be concluded that in large parts of the German-speaking areas there existed a powerful and independent goddess Holle, Hulda, Hulda, or Perchta, an earth goddess, who is known in many regions and under various other names. Her original name is thus, as we saw, unknown. The names Nerthus, Herta, and Diana are highly valued in this context. So, Frau Holle is not a local or at most regional goddess, and certainly not a fairy tale figure, but a supra-regionally revered powerful earth goddess. What distinguishes Frau Holle from the Norse deities is that there are no family stories around her. She has neither husband nor children. She appears alone, sometimes with and sometimes without an entourage. The stories that she leads the wild hunt together with Woden are fairly new. In the older folk tales, she leads that hunt alone. And finally, a completely different topic about Frau Holle, because she is also remembered in older and newer recipes, which is in food and drink. Some of them are Frau Holle's snowballs, Frau Holle pie, Frau Holle dumplings, elderberry ketchup, Frau Holle bread, Frau Holle flapjacks, and so there are many more such delicious recipes. And with that, I end this short talk. As already mentioned at the beginning, I only told a few fragments from my book Goddess Holle, and in some cases I even had to summarize them. If you want to obtain the book, you can get or order it in any well-stocked bookstore, but you can also get it directly from the publisher and of course with me. Then you will get a copy autographed by me. Then just write me a note. I'm looking forward to it. Goodbye.